Up until 35 years or so ago, commentaries and commentators were basically interested in the historical dimension of the study of the Gospels and the theological implications that could be drawn from that, and devotional approaches to the Scriptures. And the scholarly commentaries were concerned with source criticism, form criticism, redaction criticism. It's really only in the last 35 years that the study of the Gospels has branched out, has blossomed in all sorts of. It's really only in the last 35 years that commentaries have and commentators have really branched out and developed their study of the Scriptures along the lines that we were exploring in Module A. And it really is something that's very exciting. It's different. It relates to the modern world in new ways that are very important. We do our congregations an injustice if the commentaries we use are just ones that predate the 1960s. A greater injustice if they're early 20th century or earlier century. Of course, those commentaries have value. They have insights that are still worth reading and worth taking on board. But they miss out so many dimensions of the study of the Scriptures that relate to the modern world so effectively. Do get hold of, even at a simple level, things like Tom Wright's Mark for everyone, Matthew for everyone, Luke for everyone, and the more recent commentaries that we recommend. One of the there are three areas that we've touched on in our module notes where which highlight some of those newer techniques we were looking at in general in Module A. Narrative criticism that focuses on the way in which a story is put together, how it flows from beginning through the middle to the end, how different characterizations are made, how different readers will receive that story, and how that story plays in different contexts. Socioscientific criticism takes seriously a study of the society of Jesus' day in order to appreciate what's going on in the stories that the texts recount. Rhetorical criticism that looks at techniques of putting an argument across and how the gospel writers have used such techniques. Behind me I've got a whole shelf of commentaries written on the Bible. Most of them have been written by men because most of my commentaries come from when I studied a while back. I've tried to keep pace and buy more recent ones too, but I've got lots that were written in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 60s and earlier still that I've perhaps inherited. And practically all of them are written by men. Because one of the things that's happened in the last 35 years is that women theologians and women biblical scholars have begun having their work published as well. One volume commentary like the Oxford Bible Commentary that we recommend has many contributions by women scholars. Now their insights can be different and throw new light onto the text. They are different perspectives, different ways of reading. All of these are important. One of the commentaries we recommend is the African Bible Commentary. And time and again you'll find how those African commentators will look at texts and see them and hear them speak against their African context in ways that in some occasions actually relate to the kind of society that Jesus was in, far more than a Western, European, American commentator might relate to those texts. I want to take a couple of examples and show how these new approaches throw a different light on texts that are very familiar. Let's take one example that you will recall and know. The story when Jesus is challenged about paying taxes and he asks for a coin and he says, "Give to Caesar what is due to Caesar, give to God what is due to God." How many times have we heard that story used to explain that we need to pay our taxes on the one hand and respect the civil authorities, and on the other hand we need to give our dues to God? And we read it in a straightforward way like that, and it means instantly just what it says. Let's take into account some of that background in the Roman world that we were exploring a couple of video clips ago. Remember the Herodians and those aristocracy, the wealthy, the powerful, the Sadducees, the high priests, those who were collaborating with Rome. And notice then how there were different schools of Pharisees and such like. Now let's read the text, and we'll see what the text has to say. And it's in Mark chapter 12, verse 13. Then they sent to him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. Now, straight away, we see that Pharisees are liaising with Herodians. Now, the Pharisees often stood over against Herodians. So this must have been those Pharisees that were prepared to work with the Herodians. Remember, the Herodians have been involved in massive building works, very exploitative of people. And they are willing to build a temple to Augustus in Caesarea Philippi and in Caesarea by the seaside, as well as honour the temple to Yahweh in Jerusalem. These are the Herodians, and they're the ones who come to him and say, "Teacher, we know that you're sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth." Hey, how different from Herod and the ruling class and the Roman approach, which actually is full of deference, full of hierarchical structures, as a social scientific study of Roman society at this time will show. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not? It's a massive question, a hot question in Jerusalem. So how is Jesus going to respond? But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them. So the hypocrisy relates to deference, impartiality. He knows that they are deferential. He knows that they are partial. He knows what the Herodians are like. "Why are you putting me to the test?" he asks. "Bring me a denarius and let me see it." It's not any old, it's it's a Roman coin. And they brought one, and they said to him, and notice the question, whose head is this, and whose title, whose inscription? It's not just a question about the image on the coin, but also a question about the inscription. Now, inscriptions of Roman coins will dedicate the coin to the emperor, sometimes as Pontifex Maximus, high priest, sometimes as Son of God, sometimes as divine. Jesus draws attention to the inscription on the coin. The social scientific narrative approach to the scriptures draws our attention to. And they answered, "The emperors." So if it's the emperor, Tiberius, he'll be described as chief priest, high priest. He'll be described as the great high priest. He'll be described perhaps as divine. He'll be described perhaps as Son of God. So Jesus says to them, "Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." Now, is Jesus taking a quite neutral stance and saying, well, just give the emperor whatever the emperor demands, whatever the emperor wants, and give to God whatever God demands? Or is there a touch of irony in Jesus's voice? Give to the emperor, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And we all know what is Caesar's and what we owe Caesar. And give to God what is God's. And we all know that we owe everything to God. What a different way of approaching that passage. In a moment or two's time, I want to look at another passage, so you can get ready and move on in Mark's Gospel chapter 12 to verse 38. And we'll come back to that in a moment.